Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Minister, you said in your preamble that you were in China to advocate for Canadian agriculture. But the headline in the media when you returned was Canada's agriculture minister given cold shoulder by Chinese government on trip to Beijing. That was the headline after your recent return from that trip. Did you try to secure a meeting with your Chinese counterpart prior to you leaving to Beijing?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm certainly, I'm sure my colleague understands how vitally important China is to our export market. And he's also fully aware that we export $11.5 billion to China. And of course, the sectors were advocating quite hard that I make this trip since I came back to agriculture. Now, it was a short trip and a quick trip, and it was on and off. It was off, and then the sectors kept pushing, and I made the trip there and met with a number of exporters from this country and a number of importers from China. And there's one thing I did learn.
So, Minister, did you have a meeting with your Chinese counterpart?
When you sell a product to a foreign country, it's vitally important, Mr. Chair, that you follow up with representation. And that is what we did. What we did in China was meet with the people that buy the products from our country.
Okay,
and
thanks.
we want to make sure, Mr. Speaker.
I have a minute. You know how this works. I have a limited amount of time. I did not have a meeting with your Chinese counterpart.
The way this works, Mr. Chair, he asked the question.
Hold on there, Mr. Minister and Mr. Barlow. I've stopped the clock. You can appreciate as the chair. I want to give the liberty to my honourable colleagues to ask questions. Minister McCauley, I know you want to certainly explain, and we want to give room. But within reason, I'll have to intervene to make sure that we're not having both of you overtalk the translators at the same time. So I would ask, certainly if it's a relatively pointed question, Minister, if you could try to stay relatively pointed, that would be helpful, and we'll try to avoid that overlap. So go ahead, Mr. Drouin.
If the opposition is insinuating that staying in your basement and doing international relations or trade from your basement is a good thing, then they should follow their leadership, and it's a great thing. But in our side, we believe that the minister should show up and actually do the work that needs to be done.
You'll have your time, Mr. Durant. You'll have your 6 minutes. You can talk about that all you want.
So not a point of order. Again, it's a balance here. Don't make my job overly hard here today to everyone. So Mr. Barlow, I have stopped the clock. I'll go back. But again, Minister, certainly we want to hear a bit of an expansive piece on what you're doing, but we have to be mindful of managing time for our colleagues as well. Go ahead, Mr. Barlow.
So, thank you, Chair. And clearly he did not have a meeting with his Chinese counterpart, so I'm not sure how you're advocating for Canadian agriculture when you can't even get a meeting with your Chinese counterpart, which is put on punishing tariffs on Canadian canola. But, Minister, in 2022, you gave $8.5 million to Aspire Food Group to build a cricket factory that is now in financial trouble. Minister, did you review their business plan before granting the $8.5 million? That's a pretty clear yes or no question.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for the question, and of course he indicated quite clearly, and he referred to my Chinese trip before he asked the question, and I again emphasize it's so vitally important. And I know my honourable colleague is very interested in trade to make sure we sell our grain products to China. And in fact, they indicated, the importers indicated so clearly to us, if we're going to sell products, we have to be there. And on the crickets, I certainly appreciate and understand, and where am I here? I understand the question, Mr. Speaker, and of course it was fully evaluated, and I was not the minister at the time, but that makes no difference. It would be fully evaluated by the department and by my ministry, of course, or the Minister of Agriculture. And these decisions are made in that manner. It's evaluated by the department. No, you asked me a question.
Yeah,
so
you answered it. You answered it. You said it was reviewed. So last July, your government forked over another $500,000 to this food group. Is that correct? Right. To Aspire Foods.
I'd have to evaluate exactly what we paid in the last 6 months, a year. But of course, it's an industry that's going through restructuring, as my honourable colleague is fully aware.
Okay, so if that's the case, you know they're restructuring. Why did you give a business that you know is financially struggling another $500,000?
Well, of course, it would have to depend on a business plan. That's how evaluations are made by the department and by the minister. But do you have anything to add on that, Tom?
Just briefly, Minister, maybe just add that there are those starting to grow insects on a commercial scale for protein, principally for the pet food market. These are sort of startup businesses. These are novel things, and there is some risk associated with ventures of that nature.
So the maximum contribution from AFC for the Agri-Innovate program, which this got funding for, it was $5 million, and yet you gave them $8.5 million. So why was this group given an additional $3.5 million over the cap in Agri-Innovate?
Well, Mr. Chair, we'd have to evaluate that situation, but this decision was made and, of course, fully evaluated by the department and, of course, the advice given to the minister, but the decision is made, of course, by the minister.
So you by almost 33%, you gave this company over what the cap is on Agri-Innovate, and you don't know why they were given an additional $3.5 million over the $5 million cap in a failing business?
My honourable colleague, I'll turn it to my deputy, but of course it was evaluated, and I'll turn it to my deputy.
Thank you, Chair. We'll try to come back in this session with the amount on Agri-Innovate. It seems very unlikely to me, and I admit this precedes my time in the department. It seems unlikely to me that we would have exceeded the Agri-Innovate contribution level, but we'll come back to you quickly on that.
Just the company is more than 50% owned by two billionaires, Mr. Riley with Clearwater Seafood and Mr. Lapron. So this is interesting that they were given in excess of the cap. But my final question, Mr. Minister, 3 years ago, your predecessor said she was optimistic the self-imposed ban would be lifted in a couple of weeks on the PEI seed potato ban. Now that's 1,103 days ago, and still that ban is in place. I ran into a number of PEI farmers this week at the Young Farmers event in Alberta, and they all want to know, when is this cap or ban, self-imposed ban on PEI seed potatoes going to be lifted?
So, I thank my honourable colleague for his interest in the seed potato industry in Prince Edward Island, but of course I think he's fully aware why the ban is there. We export over 90% of what we produce in Prince Edward Island. We have to be sure that it meets the requirements of the United States. He understands that we did have a problem with potato wort. And this ban was put in place to make sure that the border stayed open. I think anybody that's exporting potatoes from Prince Edward Island fully understands that and fully supports what's taking place. And I'm sure my honourable colleague does too, because he knows. He knows very well.
The people in PEI certainly do know who's on their side.
Mr. Barlow, you're way at time, and I am going to turn it over to Mr. Drouin.
Yeah, for 30 seconds, Mr. Chair.